Chapter 1. The Architecture of Control. The map room smelled of beeswax and stale aggression. Kael Draven stood at the head of the obsidian table and let the silence stretch until it became a physical weight pressing down on his council. He did not need to shout. Shouting was for men who feared they would not be heard. Kael simply waited. His gaze traced the jagged border lines drawn in red ink across the parchment. The northern territories were swelling like a bruise, encroaching on his lands. Every inch lost was a testament to weakness, and in Kael's court, weakness was a capital offense. "The northern alpha grows bold," Lord Vane murmured. The older wolf leaned forward, the firelight catching the silver streaks in his beard. Vane was his uncle, his advisor, and the only man in this room who remembered the night Kael's parents bled out on the throne room floor. "He demands an answer regarding the trade routes, or so he claims." "He demands attention," Kael corrected. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the heavy timber of the table. "He tests our fences to see if the wood is rot." "Then show him iron," General Thorne barked, slamming a fist onto the wood. "We mobilize the legions. We strike before the frost sets in." Kael shifted his eyes to the general. The movement was slow, predatory. "And leave our southern flank exposed to the rogue packs gathering in the valleys? You think with your claws, Thorne. I need you to think with your head." The general stiffened but lowered his gaze. Submission. It was the only currency Kael accepted. He turned back to the map. The survival of this kingdom did not rest on battles fought in the mud. It rested on absolute, unyielding order. Chaos had taken his family. Chaos had stripped him of his boyhood and forced a crown of blood onto his brow at 19. He would not let it inside these walls again. "There is another way to secure the north," Vane said softly. The room went still. The air thickened with the unspoken implication. "Speak plainly," Kael commanded. "A union," Vane continued, his eyes gleaming with a calculation Kael knew well. "The moon ceremony is tonight. The goddess may grant you a mate, yes. But if she does not, or if the bond falls on someone insignificant, the Northern Alpha has a daughter. A political marriage would cement the border without spilling a drop of blood." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. A political match. Cold. Strategic. Safe. Kael felt his inner wolf bristle, pacing the cage of his ribs. The beast wanted a mate of fire and soul, a true bond. But the king? The king knew that love was the crack in the armor where the assassin's blade slipped in. His father had loved his mother so desperately that he died trying to reach her rather than securing the room. Love was a liability. "The moon ceremony proceeds," Kael said, his tone final. "But I will not be ruled by superstition. If the goddess grants a mate, I will judge if she is fit to stand beside me. If she is not, I will do what is necessary for the crown." Vane bowed his head, hiding a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Spoken like a true sovereign. The North will be watching tonight, sire. Alpha Silas has sent emissaries. They will be looking for any sign of instability." "Let them look," Kael said. He turned away from the table, walking toward the high-arched window that overlooked the courtyard. Below, servants were hanging lanterns for the ceremony. It looked festive. It looked like a trap. "They will find only stone." The meeting dismissed with the scraping of chairs and the murmur of exiting counselors. Kael remained alone. He pressed his hand against the cold glass. The reflection staring back was hard, angular, and terrifyingly composed. He had spent 10 years building this fortress around his heart. Tonight, the moon would try to breach it. He adjusted the cuffs of his tunic, feeling the phantom stain of blood on his hands that no amount of scrubbing could ever truly remove. He would attend the ceremony, he would play the role, but he would not yield. The kingdom came first. Always the kingdom. Chapter 2. The Ghost in the Stone. The air in the royal crypt was always 10 degrees colder than the rest of the castle. It was a dry, preservationist cold that settled deep in the marrow. Kael preferred it here. The dead did not scheme. The dead did not demand alliances or whisper sedition in the corridors. They simply waited. His boots clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, the sound echoing into the vaulted darkness. He stopped before two sarcophagi carved from white granite. They lay side by side, their stone hands clasped in an eternal mockery of the devotion that had killed them. King Alaric and Queen Alara. Kael did not kneel. Kings do not kneel. He stood rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at his father's stone face. The council pushes for war or marriage, Kael told the silence. Vane pushes for the latter. He thinks a bedwarmer from the north will keep the wolves at bay. His own wolf snarled in the back of his mind. Mate comes soon. Kael shoved the beast down. Quiet, he hissed into the empty room. The agitation in his chest had started at sunrise. It was a physical itch, a burning under the skin that no amount of training could suppress. The elders called it the pull, the magnetic alignment of souls before the bond snapped into place. He hated it. It felt like losing control. It felt like the moment the palace doors burst open 10 years ago. He remembered the noise, the confusion, the way his father had looked at his mother. Panic, not for the kingdom, but for her. That split second of hesitation had cost them everything. If his father had been a king first and a husband second, the guards would have been alerted in time. Instead, they died holding hands. Kael traced the inscription on the base of the tomb, bound in life, united in death. I will not make your mistake, Kael whispered. The vow was iron in his throat. I will not trade the safety of the pack for the beating of a heart. A draft swept through the crypt, carrying the scent of rain and damp earth. But beneath that, something else hit him. A scent so faint it was almost a hallucination. Wildflowers. Ozone. The sharp tang of winter berries. His head snapped up, his pupils dilated, swallowing the iris. The wolf surged forward, clawing at the mental barriers Kael had erected. It was not a smell from the crypt. It was drifting down from the ventilation grates that led to the courtyard above. She was here. The realization hit him with the force of a warhammer. She was already in the castle. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his gut. He had assumed he would have time. He had assumed he could assess the candidates, weigh their lineage, calculate their political worth. But this scent? This scent bypassed logic. It went straight to the primitive animal brain that demanded he hunt, claim, protect. He gripped the edge of the sarcophagus until the stone bit into his palm. He needed pain. He needed to ground himself in the physical reality of his duty. You are the Alpha King, he recited, the mantra he had used to survive the lonely nights of his youth. You are the shield. You are the law. You are the stone. The scent grew stronger, taunting him. It promised warmth. It promised a place to rest. It was a lie. He pushed away from the tomb, his movements jerky and uncoordinated for the first time in years. He had to get to the surface. He had to face this threat head-on. If the bond was forming, he had to be the one to control it. He had to sever the limb to save the body if necessary. He marched toward the exit, the heavy iron door groaning as he shoved it open. The noise of the gathering crowd above washed over him. Drums, laughter, the chaotic pulse of the pack. Somewhere in that sea of bodies was the source of the scent. He would find her, and he would decide her fate. Kael emerged from the darkness of the crypt into the torchlit corridor. His face was a mask of indifference, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was walking into an ambush, and the enemy was his own soul. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The courtyard was a cauldron of noise and fire. Massive bonfires roared in the four corners of the stone plaza, sending sparks spiraling up to join the stars. The rhythmic pounding of drums vibrated through the soles of Kael's boots as he ascended the dais. Hundreds of his subjects stood below. The air was thick with the musk of shifters, the smoke of roasting meat, and the electric anticipation of the moon ceremony. Kael took his seat on the stone throne. He sat with his spine not touching the backrest, poised, ready. Lord Vane stood to his right, his eyes scanning the crowd with hawk-like intensity. The northern emissaries were clustered near the front, their arms crossed, their expressions unreadable. They were watching for weakness. "Let the ceremony begin," Kael commanded. His voice was amplified by the acoustics of the courtyard, cutting through the din. The drums ceased. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with expectation. Young wolves of age stepped forward. The moonlight bathed the center of the plaza in silver. Kael watched with detached disinterest as pairs formed, gasps of recognition echoing as bonds snapped into place for the common folk. He clapped politely. He nodded where appropriate. But his wolf was screaming. Close. She is close. Mine. The scent hit him again, this time like a physical blow. Wildflowers and winter berries. It was so potent his vision blurred. He gripped the arms of the throne, the stone cracking audibly under his fingers. A girl stepped into the circle of moonlight. She was not dressed in the silks of the nobility. She wore a simple tunic of gray wool. Her hair was a dark, cascading river down her back, and her eyes, even from this distance, burned with a fierce amber intelligence. Seraphina, the daughter of a minor border beta. Politically invisible, strategically useless. Kael's breath hitched. Their eyes met. The world vanished. The noise of the crowd fell away. The fires dimmed. There was only the golden thread of energy that erupted between them, binding his chest to hers. It was a rush of pure dopamine, a feeling of coming home after a century of war. His soul reached for her. He wanted to leap from the dais. He wanted to kneel at her feet and lay the world in her hands. "Mate!" his wolf roared in triumph. "Mate!" Seraphina's lips parted. She took a step toward him, her expression shifting from confusion to wonder. She felt it too. The pull was undeniable. Then Kael saw the northern emissary lean forward. He saw the smirk on the man's face. He saw Vane stiffen beside him. If he claimed her, he claimed a nobody. He weakened his political standing instantly. The North would see a king ruled by biology, not strategy. They would see a man who chose a peasant girl over an alliance. They would attack. The vision of his parents' bodies flashed in his mind. The blood on the floor. The cost of love. The warmth in his chest turned to ice. The survival instinct that had kept him alive for 10 years slammed the gate shut on his heart. He stood up. The movement was abrupt, violent. The crowd gasped, sensing the bond. They waited for him to descend. They waited for the embrace. Kael looked down at Seraphina. He saw the hope in her eyes. He prepared to kill it. "The moon goddess tests us," Kael announced. His voice was cold, devoid of the tremor that shook his hands. "She offers distractions to see if we remain focused on our duty." Seraphina stopped moving. The color drained from her face. "I am the king," Kael declared, his voice booming across the silent courtyard. "My life belongs to the kingdom. I cannot afford the luxury of a bond that offers no strength to this throne." He looked directly into Seraphina's amber eyes. He needed her to hate him. It was the only way to save her from the target that would be painted on her back if she stood beside him. "I reject you," Kael said. The words tasted like ash. "I reject the bond." The collective gasp of the crowd sucked the air out of the plaza. Rejection was rare. Public rejection was agony. Kael felt the bond snap. It was a physical tear in his soul, a pain so blinding he almost doubled over. He forced himself to stand tall. He forced himself to look at her without flinching. Seraphina didn't scream. She didn't fall. She stood there, the moonlight highlighting the single tear that tracked through the dust on her cheek. Her chin lifted. The fragility vanished, replaced by a steel that mirrored his own. She looked at him not with sorrow, but with a terrifying clarity. "You choose your crown, Kael Draven," she whispered. The silence was so profound her voice carried to the dais. "But a crown is just cold metal. It will not keep you warm when the winter comes." She turned her back on him. She walked away, into the shadows, leaving him standing on his pedestal. Kael sat back down. He had secured his borders. He had proven his strength. He had saved the kingdom. So why did he feel like he had just died? From the shadows of the colonnade, Vane watched the girl leave, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. The king had passed the test. Now the real game could begin. Chapter 4. The Phantom Limb. 3 weeks had passed since the moon ceremony, and the silence in the castle was louder than the screams of a dying man. Kael stood on the battlements, the wind whipping his cloak like a banner of war. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. They were strong. They were empty. The bond he had severed did not heal. It festered. It felt like a phantom limb, a persistent, aching void where a connection should have been. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the amber fire of her gaze. Every time he inhaled, the ghost of wildflowers and winter berries taunted him, a sensory hallucination that refused to fade. He had chosen the kingdom. He had chosen stability. So why did the very foundation of his rule feel like it was turning to sand? "The reports are confirmed, sire." General Thorne approached, his boots heavy on the stone. The old warrior looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights patrolling the southern ridge. "She crossed the Whispering Pass," Kael said. It was not a question. He had felt the distance stretching, a physical tearing in his chest that grew tauter with every mile she put between them. "She did not go alone," Thorne corrected. He hesitated, a rare sign of uncertainty in a man who had faced down rogue bear shifters without flinching. "7 of your guard deserted the night of the ceremony. 3 trackers, 2 healers, they followed her." Kael turned slowly. The stone railing under his grip groaned. Deserters. In his father's time, they would be hunted and hung. But these were not cowards fleeing battle. They were wolves following a pull stronger than an oath to a crown. They were following a true alpha. "Let them go," the king said, his voice devoid of inflection. "Sire." Thorne blinked. "That is treason. If we do not make an example, if we hunt them, we validate them." Kael cut him off. "They have walked into the Deadlands. The Frost or the Rogue packs will claim them before the moon turns. We have more pressing concerns." He gestured to the north. Smoke spiraled against the gray horizon, thin black ribbons marking fresh raids. The northern alpha was not appeased by Kael's rejection of a mate. If anything, Silas saw it as a desperate maneuver, a sign that the boy king was afraid of his own biology. The attacks had increased in frequency and brutality. "Vane believes Silas is testing the perimeter defenses," Kael noted, watching the smoke drift. "Vane believes what suits Vane," Thorne grunted, spitting over the wall. "I believe Silas smells blood. He knows you are unmated. He knows the pack is unsettled. A king who rejects his destiny is a king who doubts his own instincts. The soldiers are whispering, Kael. They wonder if you are cursed." Kael's eyes flashed. The gold in his irises bled into the black. "Let them whisper. As long as they hold the line, I do not care what they say in the barracks." But he did care. The doubt was a cancer. It started in his own gut and spread outward. He had acted to prevent the chaos that killed his parents, yet chaos was scratching at the gates regardless. "Double the watch on the northern ridge," Kael commanded, turning back to the tower door. "And Thorne? Do not speak her name in my presence again. Seraphina is gone. She is a ghost. We do not chase ghosts." He walked away before the general could see the tremor in his hand. He had exiled her, to save himself. But as the cold wind bit through his tunic, Kael realized the terrifying truth. He hadn't exiled her. He had set her free. Chapter 5. The Rise of the Rogue Queen. Winter came early, bringing with it a silence that buried the world in white. The trade routes froze. The border skirmishes slowed to a grinding halt, trapped in the ice. But in the map room, the heat was suffocating. Kael stared at the new territory marked on the parchment. It shouldn't exist. The Deadlands were a graveyard of rock and ice, a place where exiles went to die. No pack had ever survived a single winter there. Yet the scouts were bringing back stories that sounded like madness. "They call it the sanctuary," Vane said, his voice dripping with disdain. He tapped a finger on the ink-stained map, right in the heart of the wasteland. "They say she has united the rogue factions, the broken, the clanless, the violent. They have built a fortress in the canyon." Kael felt a spike of jealousy so sharp it nearly bent him double. He masked it with a sneer. "Rogues do not unite, Uncle. They kill each other for scraps. A girl cannot tame wolves that have lost their minds." "She is not just a girl anymore, is she?" Vane countered smoothly. He slid a piece of parchment across the table. "This arrived at the gate an hour ago. It bears no royal seal, yet the courier, a massive gray wolf, would not leave until it was placed in your hands." Kael stared at the folded paper. It smelled of pine and ozone. It smelled of power. He broke the wax seal. The script was elegant, sharp, and unyielding. "To the king of the lowlands, the north gathers for a final strike. They will not attack your walls. They will breach the aqueducts beneath the city. My scouts have intercepted their plans. I offer this intelligence not as a subject, but as a sovereign neighbor. Meet me at the neutral glade at high sun, or drown." Seraphina. Kael crushed the letter in his fist. Sovereign neighbor. The audacity took his breath away. She was claiming equality. She was claiming dominion over land he had dismissed as worthless. "It is a trap," General Thorne rumbled from the corner. "Silas is using her. He has captured her and forced her to write this to lure you out." "No," Kael said softly. "Silas could not force her to do anything." He remembered the look in her eyes at the ceremony, the steel, the absolute refusal to break. He had rejected her to protect her from the political machinery of his court, but he had underestimated her. She hadn't needed his protection. She had needed a kingdom, and when he refused to share his, she built her own. "Prepare the guard," Kael ordered. The lethargy that had plagued him for months evaporated. His wolf paced, eager, hungry. "We ride for the glade." "Sire, this is madness," Vane hissed, stepping into his path. "You cannot legitimize a rogue leader. It weakens your claim. If you meet with her, you acknowledge her power." Kael looked down at his uncle. For a second, he saw the older man not as a mentor, but as a shackle. Vane wanted a puppet. He wanted a king who stayed in the map room, safe and controlled. "I acknowledge the threat, Vane," Kael said, his voice cold iron. "And if she speaks the truth about the aqueducts, ignoring her would be suicide. I will see her. I will judge this queen for myself." He strode out of the room, the letter burning against his palm. The bond he had tried to starve was suddenly roaring, fed by a new emotion. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was challenge. Chapter 6. Blood on the Snow. The neutral glade was a circle of ancient weirwood trees that stood as silent witnesses to centuries of treaties and betrayals. The snow here was undisturbed, a pristine sheet of white under the pale winter sun. Kael arrived with 12 of his elite guard. They fanned out, hands hovering over hilts, eyes scanning the tree line. The air was crisp, silent. Then the forest shifted. They didn't emerge like an army. They emerged like shadows detaching from the trees. Wolves. Dozens of them. They were scarred, rough-coated, the discarded refuse of other packs. But they moved with a disciplined synchronization that chilled Kael to the bone. They were not a rabble. They were a legion. And at their center, she walked. Kael stopped breathing. Seraphina wore furs as white as the snow, armor made of hardened leather and silver plating. She looked taller. The girl who had wept a single tear was gone. In her place was a woman who moved with the predatory grace of an apex predator. Her eyes locked onto his, and the impact was a physical collision. The bond slammed into him. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a tidal wave. His wolf howled, clawing at the back of his throat, demanding he cross the distance, demanding he submit, claim, fight. He forced his feet to stay planted. "You look well," he said. The words felt inadequate, stupid. "I look alive," Seraphina replied. Her voice was different, deeper, resonant with command. She stopped 10 paces from him. Her guards halted instantly. "Which is more than I can say for you, Kael. You look like a man who hasn't slept since the moon turned." "I did not come here to discuss my sleep schedule," Kael snapped, the defensive anger flaring. "You claim the north targets the aqueducts. Prove it." She signaled to one of her lieutenants. A scarred wolf stepped forward and tossed a bundle at Kael's feet. It unrolled in the snow, blueprints of the city's underground waterways, marked with demolition points. The seal of the Northern Alpha was stamped in the corner. "My scouts caught a Northern sapper unit 3 miles from your western wall," she said. "They talked before they died." Kael stared at the plans. It was a death stroke. If the aqueducts burst, the lower city would flood, drowning thousands and leaving the castle without water. Silas wasn't testing the fences, he was planning a massacre. "Why?" Kael asked, looking up at her. "Why save us? You owe this kingdom nothing. You owe me nothing." Seraphina's expression softened, just a fraction. A glimpse of the girl he had known. "I do not save you for you, Kael. I save the people. Innocents should not drown because their kings are too busy measuring their egos to watch the water." The insult landed, sharp and deserved. Kael opened his mouth to respond, to defend, to apologize. He didn't know which. The air snapped. It was a sound like a dry branch breaking, but louder. A hiss followed. "Down!" Seraphina screamed. She moved before the thought fully formed in Kael's mind. She didn't dive for cover. She dove for him. Her body collided with his, knocking him into the snow. A heavy black arrow whistled through the space where his throat had been a millisecond before. It buried itself in the trunk of a weirwood tree with a sickening thud. Chaos erupted. "Ambush!" Thorn roared. Kael scrambled up, his sword clearing its scabbard in a blur of steel. Arrows rained down from the canopy. But they weren't coming from the north. They were coming from the ridge behind his own lines. Seraphina was on her feet, a dagger in each hand. She wasn't looking at the attackers. She was looking at him, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with the realization of who had just tried to kill him. "Traitor!" she hissed, parrying an arrow that sought her heart. Kael turned to look at the ridge. He saw the crest of his own house on the archers' tabards. These weren't northern soldiers. They were his. The betrayal was a cold knife in his gut. Someone inside his inner circle wanted him dead, and they had used this meeting to do it. "We have to move!" Seraphina grabbed his arm. The touch sent shockwaves of heat through his armor. "They have the high ground." Kael looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at the arrows falling like black rain. The politics were gone. The strategy was gone. There was only the snow, the blood, and the woman who had saved his life despite his rejection. He grabbed her hand back. "With me." They ran together, not as king in exile, but as a pack of two into the teeth of the storm. Chapter 7. The Weight of a Shadow. The arrow had grazed Kael's shoulder, a burning line of fire that throbbed in time with his frantic heartbeat. They huddled beneath the overhang of a limestone ridge, the blizzard outside masking their ragged breathing. It wasn't the cold that made the king shiver. It was the realization that the shaft protruding from the snowdrift a few feet away bore the crimson fletching of his personal guard. Seraphina moved with efficient, ruthless grace. She didn't ask for permission. She ripped the fabric of his tunic, exposing the wound to the biting air. Her fingers were cool against his fevered skin, calloused from months of survival in the Badlands. "Hold still," she commanded. It wasn't a request. "They were my men," Kael rasped, the words tasting like copper. "The archers. They wore the royal crest." "Tabards can be stolen," she countered. packing a handful of snow against the gash to staunch the bleeding. Loyalty is harder to fake, but someone in your inner circle has managed it. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. In the dim gray light of the storm, Seraphina was a revelation. Gone was the soft girl from the ceremony. This woman was forged from steel and winter. She didn't flinch at the blood. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She assessed the threat and neutralized the damage. The bond between them, usually a dull ache, suddenly flared into a roaring inferno. His wolf pressed against the surface of his mind, whining, desperate to comfort her, to claim her, to thank her. Kael grit his teeth against the pull. He didn't deserve to want her. Not after he had driven her into the wilderness. Why? He asked again, the question heavy in the small space. You could have let the arrow hit. You could have let the usurpers take the crown. You would have been free. Seraphina paused. Her amber eyes locked onto his, stripping away his defenses layer by layer. I didn't save the king, she said softly, her voice barely rising above the wind. I saved the man who is too blind to see the knife in his own hand. She tied a strip of cloth around his arm, pulling the knot tight. We cannot stay here. If they missed, they will track. And if they track, they will finish the job. We need to move before the scent settles. Kael nodded, pushing himself up. The world tilted on its axis, but he steadied himself against the rock wall. He was the alpha. He had to be. But as he followed her into the whiteout, watching her scan the horizon for threats he hadn't even sensed, he realized the terrifying truth. He wasn't leading this pack anymore. Chapter 8. A Crown of Glass. The safe house was a hunting lodge abandoned a generation ago, smelling of dry rot and old secrets. Kael paced the floorboards, the map spread out on the singular dusty table. The fire Seraphina had coaxed from damp logs crackled, casting long, dancing shadows that looked too much like assassins. They had circled back, avoiding the main roads, slipping through the perimeter like ghosts. Now, the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a silence thick with unsaid things. The trajectory, Kael muttered, tracing a line on the parchment. The shooters were positioned on the high ridge. Only the Royal Guard has clearance for that elevation during a diplomatic summit. And who commands the Royal Guard when you are in the field? Seraphina asked. She stood by the window, peering through the cracked shutters. She hadn't taken off her armor. She didn't trust the walls. General Thorn, Kael said, though the name felt wrong in his mouth. Thorn was blunt, aggressive, a hammer. This ambush had been a scalpel, precise, cowardly. Or, your uncle, she finished for him. Kael slammed his fist onto the table. Vane raised me. He sat by my bed when the fever took me. He taught me to hold a sword. He would not. He would if he thought you were weak. Seraphina turned, her silhouette framed by the dying light. You rejected the bond to secure the throne. A logical choice, perhaps. But to a man like Vane, logic without brutality is just hesitation. He doesn't want a king, Kael. He wants a weapon. And you have started to think for yourself. The accusation hung in the air. It wasn't an insult, it was a diagnosis. Kael walked toward her. The room shrank. The scent of her, wildflowers and ozone, was suffocating in the best way possible. He wanted to bridge the distance. He wanted to bury his face in her neck and forget the politics, the betrayal, the crown. I did what I had to do, he whispered, the defense sounding hollow even to his own ears. You did what you were told, she corrected, not backing down. And now you see where obedience gets you. Bleeding in a shack while the man who controls your strings cuts them one by one. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. The heat radiating off her was intoxicating. For a moment, he thought she might strike him. Instead, she reached out and brushed a thumb over the new scar on his jaw. Wake up, Kael, she breathed. The enemy isn't at the gate. He's sitting in your chair. Before he could lean into her touch, a sound from outside shattered the moment. A horn blast, low, mournful, signaling the arrival of a massive force. Kael pulled away, rushing to the window. Through the gloom, he saw banners. Not the silver wolf of his house, not the black bear of the north. It's not an attack, Kael realized, his blood running cold. It's a summons. Chapter 9. The Viper's Nest. The throne room doors groaned open, revealing a court that felt more like a tribunal. Kael walked in, his injury hidden beneath a fresh cloak, his face a mask of granite. Seraphina walked a step behind him, not as a subordinate, but as a dangerous variable the council hadn't calculated. Lord Vane stood at the foot of the dais. He didn't look like a man who had ordered an assassination. He looked like a concerned uncle welcoming a wayward nephew home. The performance was flawless. "Sire!" Vane exclaimed, his hands spreading wide. "We feared the worst. The scouts reported an ambush by rogue elements. We were preparing a rescue party." "Rogue elements," Kael repeated, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He didn't sit. He stopped 5 paces from Vane, occupying the center of the room. Strange. The arrows I pulled from the snow were fletched with royal pheasants. Since when do rogues have access to the armory? The room went deathly still. Vane's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened into flint. "In times of chaos, supplies are often stolen," Vane said smoothly. His gaze flicked to Seraphina, dismissing her with a sneer. "And I see you have retrieved the distraction. Perhaps she confused you regarding the nature of the attack. Exiles are known for their creative storytelling." "She saved my life," Kael growled, the wolf surfacing in his tone, "while your guards watched from the ridge." Vane took a step forward, lowering his voice so only Kael could hear. "Be careful, boy. You are tired. You are wounded. Do not make accusations you cannot survive. The council is already whispering about your stability. Bringing a rogue into the sacred hall? It looks like madness." "It looks like leadership," Kael countered. "I am done being handled, Uncle. I want a full inquiry into the deployment orders for the summit. Tonight." Vane sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "I tried to protect you, Kael. I truly did. But if you insist on bringing a stray bitch into the kennel, you must be prepared for the fleas." He signaled to the guards. A dozen spears lowered, pointing not at Kael, but at Seraphina. "She is under arrest," Vane announced to the court, his voice booming. "For conspiring with the North to assassinate the king. We have witnesses." "You lie!" Kael roared, his hand going to his sword. "Do I?" Vane challenged. "Or are you so blinded by the bond you rejected that you cannot see the trap she led you into?" Before the violence could erupt, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall slammed open with a force that shook the dust from the rafters. A herald stumbled in, pale and breathless. "The Northern Alpha!" the herald screamed. "Silas is here! He has breached the outer perimeter!" Vane's composure cracked. This wasn't part of the script. Kael looked from his uncle's shocked face to Seraphina's grim determination. The board had just been flipped. The game was no longer about investigation, it was about war. And the enemy was already in the room. Chapter 10. The Wolf at the Door. The great oak doors of the throne room did not open for Alpha Silas. They groaned under the weight of his entry. He brought the storm in with him, a gale of freezing air and the musk of unwashed furs that instantly overpowered the castle's sterile scent of lavender and beeswax. Silas was a mountain of muscle and scar tissue. He did not bow. He stopped in the center of the hall, his boots leaving muddy prints on the pristine marble floor. Behind him, a retinue of northern warriors fanned out, their hands resting casually on the hilts of their broadswords. Kael sat on the obsidian throne. He forced his spine against the cold stone, using the pain to ground himself. His shoulder throbbed where the arrow had grazed him, a constant reminder of the treason festering in his own court. Beside the dais, Vane stood with the stillness of a viper, his face an unreadable mask of diplomatic courtesy. "You breach my perimeter," Kael stated, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a thunderclap. You bring weapons into my hall. This is an act of war, Silas. This is an act of mercy, the Northern Alpha rumbled. His laugh sounded like rocks grinding together. I could have burned your crops. I could have diverted the river. Instead, I come to offer you a leash. Silas snapped his fingers. A scribe scurried forward, unrolling a parchment that stretched down to the floor. It was a marriage contract. My daughter, Alara, Silas announced. She is of breeding age. She is strong. Unite our lines, Kael Draven, and the raids stop. The aqueducts remain intact. Refuse, and I will drown your city before the sun sets. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Kael looked at the contract. It was a cage made of ink and wax. If he signed, he secured the kingdom's safety instantly. He would be the savior Vane always wanted him to be, but his eyes betrayed him. They flicked to the shadows near the eastern pillar. Seraphina stood there. She had refused to leave his side despite the council's protests. Now, she looked at the scroll, then at him. Her face was pale, her expression shattered. She saw the calculation in his eyes. She saw him weighing the lives of thousands against the ache in his chest. The bond screamed. It tore at Kael's resolve, demanding he rip the throat out of the Northern Alpha for even suggesting another mate. A generous offer, Vane interjected smoothly, stepping forward before Kael could speak. The council would be wise to consider the stability this brings. I am not the council, Kael snarled, the wolf surfacing, and I do not barter for peace with threats. Silas stepped closer, his scent aggressive and overwhelming. Then you choose blood. Look at her, boy. Look at the stray you dragged in here. Is she worth a war? Is her bed warm enough to replace the heat of a burning city? Seraphina didn't wait for Kael to answer. She didn't wait to hear him defend her or, worse, hesitate. The hesitation was the answer. She turned on her heel, her boots echoing sharply on the stone. The sound was a gavel striking a verdict. She walked out of the hall, her back stiff, her dignity a shield against the humiliation of being weighed and measured yet again. Kael watched her go. The door slammed shut, severing the visual tether, but the emotional cord remained, pulling tight around his throat until he couldn't breathe. Give me the quill, Kael said, his voice dead. Silas smirked. Vane smiled. But Kael didn't sign. He snapped the quill in half and threw the pieces at Silas's feet. You will have my answer at dawn. Get out of my sight. Chapter 11. The Ledger of Lies midnight found the castle sleeping, but Kael was awake, prowling the corridors like a ghost in his own home. He had not gone to his chambers. He had not gone to Seraphina. He had gone to the one place Vane felt safe. The Royal Archives. The door was locked, a heavy iron mechanism designed to keep secrets in and the truth out. Kael didn't bother with a key. He used the strength of the alpha blood, forcing the mechanism until the metal shrieked and gave way. Inside, the air was dry and smelled of dust and decay. Rows of ledgers lined the walls, documenting every tax, every treaty, every execution for the last century. Kael moved to the section marked with his father's reign. He needed to understand the root of the rot. He pulled a dusty volume from the shelf. Record of Treason, Year of the Red Moon. This was the year Seraphina's father, a respected beta, had been stripped of his rank and lands. The official story was embezzlement. It was the reason Kael had justified rejecting her. Her bloodline was tainted with dishonor. A king could not mate with the daughter of a thief. He flipped the pages, his eyes scanning the dense script. There it was, the confession, the transfer of funds. But the ink looked wrong. Kael brought the candle closer. The signature at the bottom of the confession was shaky, forced, and the date. He stared at the date until the numbers blurred. The confession was dated 3 days after Seraphina's father had been executed. Impossible, Kael whispered. He frantically pulled other ledgers. Troop movements, guard rosters from the night his parents died. A pattern emerged from the chaos of numbers. Shifts changed without orders. Gates left unbarred. and in every instance, one name appeared as the authorizing officer: Vane. The realization hit Kael with the force of a physical blow. Vane hadn't just capitalized on the tragedy of his parents' death, he had orchestrated the security failure. And he hadn't just disliked Seraphina's father, he had framed him to remove a rival who would have opposed Vane's influence over the young king. The rejection at the moon ceremony wasn't a noble sacrifice. It was the final move in a long con. Vane had manipulated Kael's trauma, weaponized his fear of loss, and used it to sever the one bond that could have made Kael strong enough to rule without him. "He stole everything," Kael hissed, the paper crumbling in his grip. "He stole my parents, he stole my mate, he stole my soul." A floorboard creaked behind him. Kael spun around, a dagger already in his hand. But the shadows were empty. The archives were silent. Or so it seemed. He looked down at the ledger again. A fresh drop of wax had landed on the page, right next to Vane's name. It was still warm. Someone had been here before him. Someone knew he was looking. Kael slammed the book shut. He needed Seraphina. He needed to tell her that her father was innocent, that she was innocent. He had to beg for her forgiveness before the sun rose and the war began. He ran from the archives, the truth burning a hole in his pocket. But as he reached the corridor leading to the guest quarters, the sound of heavy boots and shouting shattered the stillness of the night.
Chapter 12. The Iron Collar. The hallway leading to the east wing was blocked by a wall of crimson tabards, royal guards. Kael shoved through the line, his authority radiating like heat, forcing men to stumble back. "Stand down," Kael roared. "What is the meaning of this?" The door to Seraphina's chamber was kicked open. Inside, chaos reigned. Furniture was overturned. Seraphina stood in the center of the room, two guards gripping her arms. She wasn't fighting. She was staring at the doorway, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and betrayal. Lord Vane stepped out from the shadows of the room, holding a small wooden box. "We received a tip," Vane said, his voice heavy with mock sorrow. A servant saw her hiding something beneath the floorboards. He opened the box. Inside lay a signet ring bearing the crest of the Northern Alpha, Silas's crest. "Planting evidence is beneath even you, Vane," Kael spat, stepping forward. "Let her go, that is a direct order." "I cannot, sire," Vane replied, his voice hardening. "This is treason. Under the laws of the kingdom, laws you upheld so rigorously, a traitor must be confined immediately pending trial. The council has already signed the warrant." He held up a piece of parchment. It bore the signatures of the high elders. Vane had been busy while Kael was in the archives. "I am the king," Kael shouted, the windows rattling with the force of his voice. "My word is law." "Not in matters of high treason," Vane corrected softly. "In this, even the king is subject to the code. If you interfere, you are complicit. If you are complicit, the Northern Alpha has grounds to claim the throne by right of conquest, citing a corrupt monarchy." Kael froze. The trap was perfect. If he fought the guards to free her, he started a civil war and gave Silas a legal reason to invade. If he did nothing, she went to the dungeon. Seraphina looked at him. She saw the calculation. She saw the trap closing around his neck. "Don't," she whispered. "Seraphina." Kael started, his voice breaking. "Don't destroy the kingdom for me," she said, her voice steady, though tears pooled in her eyes. "Not again." She stopped fighting. She allowed the guards to shackle her wrists with iron cuffs etched with suppression runes. The magic in the metal flared, dampening her wolf, cutting off the bond between them. Kael felt the severance instantly. It was like going blind. The warmth, the pull, the constant presence in the back of his mind, it all vanished into cold static. "Take her to the lower levels," Vane commanded. The guards dragged her past Kael. He reached out, his fingers brushing the rough wool of her cloak, but he couldn't grab hold. He couldn't stop them. Vane paused beside his nephew. He leaned in, smelling of expensive spices and rot. "You should have signed the contract, Kael," Vane whispered. Now you have lost the girl, and by tomorrow you will lose the crown. Sleep well, Your Majesty." Kael stood alone in the wrecked room. The scent of wildflowers was fading, replaced by the metallic tang of iron and the crushing weight of his own failure. He had the truth, but Vane had the power, and Seraphina was in the dark.
Chapter 13. The King of Ashes. The stone steps spiraling down to the dungeon were slick with damp moss and the condensation of despair. Kael descended into the dark, his torch casting long, violent shadows against the walls. He did not move with the measured gait of a sovereign inspecting his prisoners. He moved with the reckless velocity of a man who had decided to burn his own house down. Every rule he had ever enforced, every protocol he had memorized since childhood, screamed at him to stop. Kings do not break laws. Kings do not assault their own jailers. But the Kael who believed in the sanctity of those laws had died the moment he saw the suppression cuffs snap around Seraphina's wrists. 2 guards stood at the iron gate of the high-security block. They straightened as he approached, their eyes widening at the naked steel in his hand. "Sire," the elder guard stammered, stepping forward. "Lord Vane gave strict orders. No visitors, not even—" Kael didn't slow down. He didn't speak. He simply swung the pommel of his sword in a brutal arc. It connected with the guard's temple, sending the man crumpling to the floor in a heap of armor and surprise. The second guard reached for his spear, but Kael was already inside his guard, driving a knee into the man's solar plexus. The violence was quick, silent, and efficient. He retrieved the key ring from the unconscious guard's belt. His hands shook, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline of crossing a line he could never uncross. He unlocked the gate and strode down the corridor, ignoring the pleas and curses from the other cells. He had eyes for only one door. Cell 42, the darkest pit in the castle. He threw the door open. Seraphina was huddled in the corner, her knees drawn to her chest. The iron cuffs on her wrists glowed with a faint, sickly green light, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. The magic was designed to suppress a wolf's spirit, to turn an apex predator into a frightened animal. She looked up. Her face was pale, stripped of color, but her eyes still held that defiant amber spark. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped. Her voice was thin, brittle. "Vane will use this. He wants you to break me out. It proves I have compromised you." "He already has his proof," Kael said, kneeling beside her. The dungeon floor seeped cold into his bones. "I am done playing his game, Seraphina. I am done being the king he built." He reached for her wrists. The suppression runes flared, burning his fingers, but he didn't pull away. He jammed the key into the mechanism. "If you free me, you are a traitor," she warned, pulling back slightly. "The council will strip you of the crown. The North will invade. You lose everything." "I lost everything 10 years ago because I was afraid to act," Kael countered, his voice rough with emotion. "I let my parents die to secure a room. I will not let you die to secure a title." The lock clicked. The iron bands fell away, clattering loudly against the stone. Seraphina gasped as her connection to the wolf rushed back. Color flooded her cheeks. The bond between them slammed into place, no longer a phantom limb, but a living, breathing tether. Kael felt her relief, her fear, her sudden, overwhelming love. He pulled her to her feet. For a second, the world narrowed to the space between them. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to promise her that they would run to the ends of the earth. But the castle groaned above them, a living beast waking up to the intrusion. "We have to move," Kael commanded, gripping her hand. "There is a secret passage in the east wall of the armory. It leads to the river." They ran toward the stairs, leaving the open cell behind them as a testament to his treason. He wasn't a king anymore. He was just a man with a sword, protecting the only thing that mattered.
Chapter 14. The Serpent's Court. The courtyard was supposed to be empty. It was the hour of the wolf, the deepest part of the night when even the sentries dozed. But as Kael and Seraphina burst from the lower stairwell into the cool night air, They were not met with silence. They were met with fire. Torches flared to life in a perfect circle around them, 50 guards, archers on the battlements. And in the center, bathed in the orange glow of the flames, stood the entire High Council. Lord Vane stepped forward from the line of elders. He didn't look angry. He looked vindicated. "I told them," Vane said, his voice projecting clearly across the stone. "I told the council that the witch had ensnared his mind. I said our king was no longer fit to rule, that he would choose his lust over the law. And here you are, proving me right." Kael pushed Seraphina behind him, raising his sword. "Stand aside, Vane. I am your king." "Are you?" A new voice boomed. Alpha Silas emerged from the ranks of the northern soldiers who stood shoulder to shoulder with the royal guard. The sight of foreign troops casually occupying his courtyard sent a spike of nausea through Kael. "A king protects his people," Silas growled, spitting on the cobblestones. "A king does not break jail to free a terrorist who plotted to drown the city. By the ancient laws of the Alliance, this is an act of war, boy. You are harboring a fugitive." "She is innocent," Kael roared. "You planted the evidence. You and Vane conspired." "Conspiracy theories from a desperate man," Vane cut in smoothly. He turned to the High Elder, a frail woman named Olenna who held the staff of judgment. "You see, Elder? He is irrational, violent. He attacks his own guards. He abandons his post. The bond has driven him mad." Elder Olenna looked at Kael with sadness in her eyes. "Kael Draven," she intoned, her voice trembling. "Surrender the prisoner, submit to the inquiry, or forfeit your crown." The choice hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Kael looked at the ring of steel surrounding them. There was no escape. The secret passage was cut off. If he fought, he would have to kill his own subjects, men he had trained with, men who looked at him now with confusion and fear. Vane had turned the pack against him not with force, but with a narrative. "I will not surrender her," Kael said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "And I will not forfeit. I challenge the accusation." "There is no challenge for treason caught in the act," Silas barked, drawing his massive broadsword. "I say we finish this now. I say we take the throne and scrub this weakness from the land." "No." Vane held up a hand. The snake wasn't done playing with his food. "We are civilized, Silas. We follow the code. If the king believes she is innocent, let her prove it." Vane smiled, a predator showing its fangs. "A public trial," Vane announced. "At high noon, the council will judge, the North will witness, and if she is found guilty, they will both hang." The soldiers hesitated, looking to their commanders. The council murmured. It was a stay of execution, but it was also a trap. Vane controlled the evidence. Vane controlled the narrative. "Take them," Vane ordered. "Separate them." Guards surged forward. This time, there were too many to fight. Kael swung his blade, catching a spear shaft, but a heavy blow to the back of his knees brought him down. He struggled, roaring as hands grabbed him, pinning him to the cold stones. He saw them dragging Seraphina away again. She didn't fight. She was staring at Vane with a look of terrifying comprehension.
Chapter 15. The Echo of Ruin. The holding cell in the North Tower was not a dungeon. It was a gilded cage. Tapestries hung on the walls and a fire crackled in the hearth. But the door was barred from the outside, and the windows were narrow slits overlooking a drop of 300 feet. Kael paced the floor, his mind a whirlwind of strategies and failures. He had played right into Vane's hand. The breakout attempt had given his uncle the visual he needed to paint Kael as unstable. Now the trial would be a farce. The heavy lock tumbled. Kael spun around, expecting Vane to come gloat. Instead, Seraphina walked in, flanked by 2 stone-faced guards who remained outside. She looked tired. The suppression cuffs were back on her wrists. "They gave me 5 minutes," she said, her voice hollow. "To say goodbye." "I am not saying goodbye," Kael said fiercely, crossing the room to grip her shoulders. I will expose him. I will tear the archives apart. I will force the scribe to confess. With what army? Seraphina asked gently. She reached up, touching his face. Her hands were cold. The council is against you. The guard follows Vane. Silas has 5 battalions at the gate. Kael, listen to me. She took a breath, steeling herself. You have to renounce me. Kael froze. What? At the trial, she continued, the words rushing out. You have to say you were under a spell. Say I bewitched you. Vane will accept it because it keeps you on the throne as his puppet and it avoids a civil war. You live. The kingdom survives. And you die, Kael whispered, horror dawning on him. I am already dead, she said, a tear finally escaping. Vane won't let me leave that circle alive, but you can still save the pack. You can still be the king they need. I don't want to be the king they need, Kael shouted, pulling her into his chest. I want to be the man who deserves you. I rejected you once for power, Seraphina. I chose the crown, and it turned to dust in my hands. Do not ask me to do it again. If you choose me now, you lose everything, she sobbed into his tunic. Your title, your home, your legacy. You will be branded a traitor. We will be hunted until the day we die. Let them hunt, Kael vowed, burying his face in her hair. Let them come. I would rather be a fugitive with you than a king in a cage. He pulled back, forcing her to look at him. The gold in his eyes was molten, consuming the black. We do not run, Kael said, a new plan forming in the wreckage of his hope. And we do not beg. Vane wants a trial? We will give him one, but it won't be the trial he prepared for. What are you going to do? Seraphina asked, searching his face. I am going to do the one thing Vane never taught me, Kael replied grimly. I am going to tell the truth, all of it. The door creaked open. The guards stepped in. Time is up, one grunted. As they pulled her away, Seraphina didn't look back with fear. She looked back with a question. She was waiting to see if he would truly break the cycle or if the weight of the crown would crush him one last time. Kael turned to the window. The sun was rising over the mountains. High noon was coming. He had one chance to rewrite history.
Chapter 16. The Art of Ruin. The great hall had transformed into a theater of judgment. Sunlight streamed through the high stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in violent shades of crimson and violet. Every seat in the gallery was filled. The air was thick, suffocating with the collective breath of 500 spectators who had come to watch their king fall. Kael stood in the center of the pit. He was unchained, but the weight of the accusations held him more securely than any iron shackle could. Beside him, Seraphina knelt. Her head was bowed, her hair a curtain of obsidian shielding her face from the jeers of the crowd. Lord Vane paced before the dais. He held a sheaf of parchments in his hand, waving them like a conductor's baton. He did not look like a villain. He looked like a grieving father, forced to discipline a wayward son. The king claims innocence. Vane addressed the gallery, his voice projecting to the rafters. He claims this woman is his mate. He claims she is a victim of a conspiracy. But we deal in facts, not the fever dreams of a man bewitched. Vane stopped. He turned to the heavy oak doors. Bring him in. 2 guards dragged a man into the light. He was small, withered, his robe stained with ink. It was the royal archivist, the man Kael had trusted to keep the history of the kingdom safe. The man Kael had visited just last night. Kael felt the blood drain from his face. Tell them, Vane commanded softly. The archivist trembled. He refused to look at Kael. The king came to me. He demanded I alter the records. He wanted me to erase the treason of the beta's father. When I refused, he threatened to burn the library to the ground. Liar! Kael stepped forward, his hands balling into fists. I came to find the truth you hid. Silence! Elder Olenna banged her staff against the stone. The witness will speak. Vane smiled. It was a small, sad expression that broke Kael's heart, because the crowd believed it. There is more, Vane continued. He pulled a small vial from his pocket. It contained a dark, viscous liquid. We found this in the prisoners' quarters. Wolfsbane concentrate, enough to poison a garrison, or a king. The crowd gasped. The sound sucked the oxygen from the room. She wasn't trying to bond with him, Vane concluded, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. She was finishing what her father started. She was here to kill him. And our king, in his loneliness, walked right into the blade. Kael looked at the vial. He looked at the archivist. The web was complete. Vane had taken every truth and twisted it until it looked like treason. The logic was flawless. The evidence was tangible. Seraphina didn't move. She didn't speak. She knew, as Kael did, that words were useless against a narrative this carefully constructed. The verdict is clear, Vane announced. But we are merciful. The king is unwell. He has been influenced by dark alchemy. We will not execute him, but we cannot allow him to rule while his mind is compromised. Silas, the Northern Alpha, stepped forward. His armor clanked, a sound like a death knell. The North offers a cure, Silas grunted. Marriage, a union to stabilize the region, a new queen to guide the king back to sanity. Sign the treaty, Kael Draven. Sign it, and the witch dies quickly. Refuse, and we burn her at the stake. The ultimatum hung in the air. Kael looked at Seraphina. She finally looked up. Her eyes were dry. They were terrified. They were begging him to surrender.
Chapter 17. The silence between heartbeats. The holding cell was not the gilded tower room this time. It was a forgotten closet beneath the stairs, damp and smelling of mildew. They had thrown Kael in here to meditate on his decision, while the scaffold was constructed in the courtyard. He was not meditating. He was dying. Through the heavy wood of the door, he could hear the rhythmic hammering of nails into wood. Each strike was a physical blow. They were building the pyre. Kael. The voice was a whisper, carried through the ventilation grate near the floor. Seraphina. She was in the adjacent cell. He scrambled to the grate, pressing his cheek against the cold iron. I'm here. I'm going to get us out. I just need to figure out the guard rotation. Stop, she said. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. There is no way out, not this time. I am the king, Kael insisted, though the title felt like a costume he had outgrown. I can order— You are a prisoner in your own castle, she cut him off, and in an hour you will be a widower. The word hung between them. Widower. It implied a marriage that had never happened, a life they would never share. I won't sign, Kael vowed. The tears were hot on his face now. I won't trade your life for a throne I don't want. Then you kill us both, Seraphina replied, and you kill the kingdom. If you refuse, Silas invades. Thousands die. My death is inevitable, Kael. Yours is optional. Your people need you. I don't care about the people. Kael slammed his hand against the wall. The pain was sharp, grounding. I care about you. I care about the fact that for the first time in 10 years I felt alive. You are the only thing that makes sense in this world of liars. That is why you have to let me go, she whispered. Because you are a good king. And a good king sacrifices the one for the many, even if the one is his heart. You are asking me to become him, Kael choked out. You are asking me to become vain, to choose power over love. No, she said softly. I am asking you to choose survival. You cannot fight Vane today. He has won. But if you live, if you stay on the throne, maybe one day you can fight him. You can avenge me, but you can't do that from the grave. Silence stretched between them, heavy and final. Kael rested his forehead against the stone. He knew she was right. The logic was unassailable. It was the same logic he had used at the moon ceremony. But this time, the choice wasn't about maintaining order. It was about buying time. "I love you," Kael whispered. It was the first time he had said it aloud. "I know," Seraphina replied. Her voice was fading, moving away from the grate. "Make it count, Kael. Make them pay." The lock on his door turned. The heavy bolt slid back. "Time to choose, sire," Vane's voice called from the corridor. Kael stood up. He wiped his face. He adjusted his tunic. The boy who had wanted to save everyone was gone. The man who walked out of that cell was hollowed out, a vessel of ash and cold iron. He was ready to surrender.
Chapter 18. The Death of the Wolf. The courtyard was silent. The hammering had stopped. The pyre stood in the center, a tower of dry wood and oil. Seraphina was already tied to the stake. She looked small against the gray sky. Kael walked up the steps to the high platform where the treaty awaited. He moved like a clockwork soldier. Every step was a betrayal. Every breath was a crime. Silas stood at the table, a smug grin plastered across his scarred face. Beside him, his daughter Ilara looked bored, picking at her fingernails. This was just a transaction to them. They were buying a kingdom with a woman's life. Vane was there, holding the quill. He offered it to Kael handle first. "For the good of the realm," Vane whispered. Kael looked at the quill. It was a white feather, stark against the black velvet of his sleeve. He looked down at the courtyard. A torchbearer stood ready at the base of the pyre. Seraphina was looking at the sky, refusing to give Vane the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "Sign," Silas grunted, "and I give the order to make it quick. An arrow to the heart, before the fire takes her. That is my mercy." Kael's hand closed around the quill. The texture was dry, brittle. He looked at the parchment. The words swam before his eyes. Union of the Northern and Southern Territories. Suppression of rogue elements. Abdication of royal autonomy. He was signing away his freedom. He was signing away his soul. "Do it," Vane urged. "Be the king your father wanted you to be." Kael lowered the pen to the paper. The ink pooled at the tip, a black tear ready to fall. The world slowed down. The sound of the wind, the crackle of the torches, the heartbeat of the crowd. It all faded into a dull roar. Kael stared at the signature line. He remembered his father. Not the king, but the man. He remembered the night of the assassination. He remembered his father's last words. Vane had always told him his father died screaming orders to the guards. But that wasn't true. Kael's memory, sharpened by the trauma of the moment, suddenly pierced through the fog of Vane's manipulation. His father hadn't screamed for the guards. He hadn't screamed for the kingdom. He had looked at Kael's mother and said, "I would burn the world to save you." The realization hit Kael with the force of a thunderbolt. His father hadn't died because he was weak. He died because he was betrayed by the very man standing next to Kael right now. The choice between love and duty was a false dichotomy, invented by Vane to control him. The quill snapped in Kael's hand. Ink splattered across the treaty, obliterating the terms of surrender. "Sire?" Vane asked, his voice tightening with sudden unease. Kael didn't look at his uncle. He looked at the pyre. He looked at the woman who had offered to die so he could live. And he felt the wolf, the true wolf, not the beast he had suppressed for a decade. "Wake up." It didn't growl. It didn't pace. It simply took control. "No," Kael said. The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of a mountain. "What did you say?" Silas stepped forward, his hand dropping to his sword. Kael turned. His eyes were no longer human. They were liquid gold, burning with a power that made the Northern Alpha stumble back. "I said no." Kael's voice vibrated through the wood of the platform, through the stone of the castle, through the bones of every shifter in the courtyard. He dropped the broken quill. He drew his sword. The sound of steel ringing against the silence was the sweetest music he had ever heard. He was done being a king. It was time to be a monster.
Chapter 19. The Lock and the Key. The ringing of drawn steel was a church bell announcing a funeral. It hung in the breathless air of the courtyard, a single, violent note that severed the ties between the king and his puppet master. Kael did not look at the army surrounding him. He stared only at Lord Vane. For 10 years, the memory of his parents' death had been a chaotic blur of screams and shadows. He had always believed the narrative Vane fed him, that the assassins had picked the lock, that the guards were slow, that his father's hesitation was the fatal flaw. But the sword in his hand, heavy and true, acted as a conduit for a different kind of memory. The fog lifted. Kael saw the heavy oak door of the safe room again. He saw his mother pulling him toward it. He saw his father pushing them inside. And then he heard the sound. Not a pick, scratching at the tumblers. A click, smooth, practiced. The sound of a key turning from the outside. The assassins hadn't broken in. They had been let in. And there were only 3 keys to that room. One was on his father's belt. One was around his mother's neck. The third hung on a silver chain that Vane wore beneath his tunic every day of his life. "It was you," Kael whispered. The realization wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It froze the marrow in his bones. You didn't just frame Seraphina. You opened the door. Vane took a step back, his composure fracturing like cheap glass. He saw the knowledge in Kael's eyes. Not suspicion, but certainty. The uncle who had played the grieving guardian was gone, replaced by a man looking at a loose end he should have cut a decade ago. "The king is unwell!" Vane shrieked, his voice cracking. "He threatens the council! Archers, take him down!" The command echoed off the stone walls. Bowstrings creaked as tension was drawn. 50 arrows pointed at Kael's heart. But Kael didn't flinch. He didn't raise a shield. He didn't cower. He let his wolf flood his veins, expanding his aura until the pressure in the courtyard was physical. A heavy blanket of dominance that made the weaker wolves whine and lower their heads. "Look at me!" Kael roared, the sound tearing through the throat of the sky. "Not at the crown! Look at the man!" He ripped the royal signet ring from his finger, the heavy gold band that had chafed him since he was 19. He threw it at Vane's feet. It clattered against the stone, spinning wildly before settling in the dust. "I am not your king because of that medal," Kael snarled. "I am your alpha because I am the only one standing between you and the lies this man has fed us for a generation." He turned his back on Vane. He turned his back on the archers. It was suicide. It was madness. It was the only move he had left. Kael walked toward the edge of the platform. Below him, the torchbearer hesitated, the flame licking the air inches from the oil-soaked wood where Seraphina waited. He had to get to her. If he died, he died. But he would not die a coward.
Chapter 20. The Altar of Ash. The jump was not graceful. Kael did not land like a hero from the tapestries. He landed like a meteor, his boots cracking the cobblestones, the impact jarring his teeth. He stood between the torchbearer and the pyre, a solitary figure against the gray dawn. The soldier holding the torch was a boy, no older than 20. His hands shook. He looked from Vane on the high balcony to the glowing, golden-eyed monster standing 3 feet away. "Drop it," Kael commanded. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The order vibrated in the boy's chest. The torch fell, hissing as it hit the damp stones. Kael turned to the pyre. Seraphina watched him, her amber eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The smoke from the nearby braziers curled around her, framing her like a martyr in a stained glass window. He didn't cut her bonds immediately. Instead, he did the unthinkable. Kael Draven, the Alpha King, the Unbroken, the Stone Sovereign, fell to his knees. A gasp rippled through the crowd, louder than the roar of any fire. Kings did not kneel. They stood. They conquered. They ruled from above. But Kael knelt in the dirt, ignoring the mud soaking into his breeches. He placed his sword on the ground, blade facing the enemy, hilt toward her. It was the ultimate sign of submission. He was offering her his life. He was offering her his power. "I chose the crown once," Kael said, his voice carrying in the unnatural silence. He looked up at her, ignoring the hundreds of eyes boring into his back. "I thought it made me strong. I was wrong. The crown is just a hat. You are the kingdom." Seraphina's lips trembled. The defiance that had held her upright finally gave way to a raw, aching vulnerability. She wasn't looking at a ruler anymore. She was looking at her mate. "Kael," she breathed, the single word shattering the last of his restraint. He reached up. He didn't use a key. He gripped the iron chains binding her ankles with his bare hands. The metal was thick, enchanted, designed to hold a shifter. It didn't matter. Kael poured everything he had into his grip, his rage, his love, the years of repressed emotion. His muscles screamed. The veins in his neck bulged. A primal growl ripped from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated effort. Snap. The chain shattered. Links of iron rained down like hail. He stood up, towering over the pyre. He took his sword back. He cut the ropes at her wrists with a single surgical stroke. Seraphina fell forward. He caught her. The impact of her body against his was the spark that finally lit the fuse. The bond exploded, blinding and brilliant, knitting their souls together in a way that no political marriage could ever replicate. Kael turned to face the army, one arm wrapped around her waist, the other pointing his blade at the balcony. "She is mine," Kael declared, "and if you want to burn her, you will have to burn me first." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The royal guard lowered their bows. They knew the code. To attack a bonded pair was to invite a curse upon the pack. Then Vane screamed, pointing a trembling finger. "He has been corrupted. Kill them both. That is an order." Silas, the northern alpha, laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. Finally, a reason to bleed. Silas drew his claymore and jumped from the dais.
Chapter 21. The First Drop of Rain. The first clash of steel was not Kael's sword meeting Silas's blade. It was the sound of General Thorn stepping forward. The old bear of a man who had served Kael's father and watched Kael grow up moved from the line of spectators. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply walked into the space between the northern alpha and the pyre. "Stand down, Silas," Thorn grunted. His voice was gravel and old scars. "You defy the regent?" Silas sneered, barely breaking stride. "Vane pays your wages, old dog." "Vane pays for my ale," Thorn corrected. He looked up at the balcony, his eyes narrowing. "But the boy just broke high iron with his bare hands. That isn't madness, Vane. That is the Alpha Prime state. We haven't seen that since the founder." A murmur ran through the ranks of the Royal Guard. Alpha Prime, the myth, the state of absolute biological supremacy triggered only by the true protection of a mate. If Kael was Prime, he wasn't just a king. He was a force of nature. "He is a traitor!" Vane shrieked, saliva flying from his lips. "Kill him, Thorn, or I will have your head on a pike." Thorn looked at Kael. He saw the gold eyes. He saw the protective stance over the girl. He saw the truth that Vane had tried to bury under layers of protocol and fear. "I think not," Thorn said. He drew his sword, but he didn't point it at Kael. He pointed it at the northern soldiers. "The Royal Guard stands with the king!" The roar that went up from the local soldiers was deafening. Half the courtyard turned, their weapons shifting targets. The other half, loyal to Vane or confused by the sudden shift, hesitated. Silas didn't care about politics. He cared about the fight. "Then you die with him," the Northern Alpha charged. He was a tank of a man, moving with terrifying speed for his size. His claymore swept down in a lethal arc, aiming to split Thorn in two. Kael moved. He didn't leave Seraphina's side, but he shoved her behind the heavy timber of the pyre. "Stay down." He met Silas's charge head-on. Their swords collided with a spray of sparks that looked like fireworks against the gloom. The impact shook Kael's bones, but he didn't yield an inch. He locked blades with the giant, their faces inches apart. "You have spirit, boy," Silas growled, his breath smelling of rotten meat. "But spirit doesn't stop steel." "No," Kael gritted out, shoving the giant back. "But the truth does." He spun, using the momentum to parry a strike from a northern soldier who tried to flank him. "Vane has the key," Kael shouted to the chaotic mass of fighting men. "Check his neck. The key to the safe room. He kept it as a trophy." It was a gamble, a desperate, wild accusation thrown into the hurricane of combat. But up on the balcony, Vane's hand flew instinctively to his throat. Thorn saw it. The movement was small, a reflex born of guilt. "Secure the balcony!" Thorn bellowed, parrying a blow and kicking a northern mercenary in the chest. "Get the uncle." The battle for the soul of the kingdom had begun. It wasn't a neat duel. It was a brawl. Loyalties fractured and reformed in seconds. But in the center of the storm, Kael Draven fought like a demon, his sword weaving a barrier of death around the woman he loved. He wasn't fighting for the throne anymore. He was fighting to burn it all down.
Chapter 22. The Teeth of the Storm. The courtyard had dissolved into a meat grinder of steel and magic. Kael deflected a blow from Silas that would have cleaved a granite pillar in two. The impact vibrated up his arms, rattling his teeth, but he did not yield ground. He was the anchor. If he moved, the pyre behind him, and the woman sheltering there, would be exposed to the northern blades hacking at the perimeter of Thorn's loyalists. Silas was a landslide in human form. The northern alpha fought with a joy that was terrifying to behold, his laughter booming over the screams of the dying. He swung his claymore like a toy, battering Kael's defenses with rhythmic, crushing strikes. "You fight well for a pup," Silas roared, spitting blood, "but you bleed like the rest." Kael ducked under a horizontal slash, driving his shoulder into the giant's midsection. It was like ramming a castle wall. Silas barely grunted, bringing his pommel down on Kael's injured shoulder. White-hot agony blinded the king. He stumbled, his boots slipping on the slick stones. "Finish him," Vane screamed from the safety of the balcony. The uncle leaned over the railing, his face twisted into a mask of desperate malice. "Cut his head off before the rest of the guard turns." Silas raised his sword for the killing stroke. Kael scrambled to lift his own blade, but his arm was numb, useless. He looked up at the falling steel, time stretching into an eternity. Then the world exploded in white fur and fury. A blur shot from behind the pyre. It wasn't a normal wolf. It was a creature of legend, a beast twice the size of any shifter on the battlefield. Its coat was the color of starlight, its eyes burning with ancient, amber intelligence. Seraphina had shifted. She didn't just tackle Silas. She hit him with the force of a battering ram. The giant flew backward, crashing into a stone fountain 10 paces away. The water turned red instantly. The battlefield froze, every sword lowered, every breath hitched, the royal lichen form. It was a myth, a bedtime story told to pups about the original bloodline of the goddess. It hadn't been seen in centuries, and it wasn't Kael who wore it. It was the exile, the traitor, the girl Vane had tried to burn. Seraphina threw her head back and howled. The sound wasn't a noise, it was a command. It resonated in the marrow of every shifter present, a biological imperative that forced knees to bend. Silas groaned, trying to stand. The great white wolf was on him in a heartbeat, her jaws clamping around his armored breastplate. She didn't bite to kill. She bit to hold. She dragged the northern alpha across the stones like a rag doll and tossed him at the foot of the balcony. Then she turned her gaze to Vane. The advisor stumbled back from the railing, terror finally piercing his arrogance. He turned to run, to flee into the castle, but the door behind him slammed shut. General Thorn stood there, blocking the exit, his sword dripping. "Going somewhere, my lord?" Thorn asked pleasantly. Vane spun around, trapped. Below him, the royal lichen growled. a sound like tectonic plates shifting. Kael stood up, gripping his sword with his good hand. He walked toward the balcony, stepping over the moaning form of Silas. "The key," Kael demanded, his voice carrying over the silence. Vane clutched his chest. I don't know what you mean." "Cut him down," Kael ordered. Thorn didn't hesitate. He grabbed Vane by the collar and threw him over the railing. Vane screamed as he fell, crashing into the dirt of the courtyard. He tried to crawl away, but Kael's boot landed on his chest, pinning him. With a savage jerk, Kael ripped the silver chain from his uncle's neck. A small, heavy iron key dangled from it. The metal was old, unique. The master key to the royal safe room. Kael held it up. The sunlight caught the iron, gleaming like an indictment. "This is the key that opened the door 10 years ago," Kael shouted to the stunned crowd. "This is the man who sold your king and queen to assassins. This is the true traitor." The truth hit the assembly with the force of a physical blow. The narrative Vane had built for a decade crumbled into dust.
Chapter 23. The Weight of Judgment. The silence following the revelation was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The soldiers looked from the broken man in the dirt to the king standing over him, and finally to the massive white wolf guarding them both. Silas sat up, coughing. He looked at Seraphina, then at Kael. The Northern Alpha wiped blood from his mouth and sheathed his claymore. "I do not fight the goddess," Silas rumbled, his voice rough. "And I do not fight the Prime. The North withdraws." It was a surrender, not out of fear, but out of respect for a hierarchy that predated politics. Silas signaled his men. They lowered their weapons, stepping back to form a perimeter, not of attack, but of observation. Kael looked down at Vane. The older man was weeping now, broken sobs that sounded pathetic in the vast courtyard. "I did it for the realm," Vane blubbered, clutching at Kael's boot. "Your father was weak. He would have negotiated away our strength. I made you strong, Kael. I made you a king." "You made me an orphan," Kael said. His voice was devoid of anger. It was just cold. "And you made me a monster. But you forgot one thing, Uncle." Kael looked at Seraphina. She shimmered, her form shifting, bones reforming until she stood before him in human skin again. She was naked, unashamed, covered in the dust of battle. Someone threw a cloak over her shoulders. "Monsters don't love," Kael finished, "and they don't lead." He turned to General Thorn. "Take him. The archives, the dungeon. I want a full confession before sunset. Then, the block." Vane shrieked as he was dragged away, his heels digging useless furrows in the earth. The sound faded as the dungeon doors swallowed him, leaving a ringing quiet in his wake. Kael swayed. The adrenaline was crashing. His shoulder screamed. He dropped to one knee, the exhaustion finally claiming its due. "Kael!" Seraphina was there instantly, her hands on his face. "I'm fine," he lied, leaning into her touch. "It's done. He's gone." "You're bleeding," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "I've been bleeding for 10 years, Kael replied. He looked around the courtyard. The royal guard was kneeling. The northern soldiers bowed their heads. They weren't bowing to the crown. They were bowing to the pair of them. Elder Olenna stepped forward, her staff tapping against the stones. She looked at the key in Kael's hand, then at the woman who had shifted into the form of legends. "The goddess has spoken," Olenna announced, her voice trembling with reverence. "Long live the king, long live the queen. Long live the queen!" The chant started as a murmur and grew into a roar. It washed over them, a cleansing tide. Kael looked at Seraphina. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at him, her eyes searching for the man beneath the title. "They are cheering for you," he said softly. "No," she corrected, gripping his hand. "They are cheering for us. Do not make me do this alone, Kael. I can fight a war by myself. I cannot rule a peace by myself." He squeezed her hand. The bond between them hummed, a warm, golden note that drowned out the pain in his shoulder. Never alone. he promised. Never again.
Chapter 24. The Moon and the Mirror. The cleanup had taken hours. The wounded were tended to, the dead honored, the treaties burned. Night had fallen over the kingdom, bringing a cool, merciful darkness to soothe the scars of the day. Kael stood on the high balcony of the royal chambers. He had bathed, the grime of battle scrubbed away, his shoulder bound in fresh linen. But he still felt the phantom weight of the armor. He heard her before he saw her, the soft pad of bare feet on stone. Seraphina stepped out into the moonlight. She wore a simple nightgown of white silk, loose and flowing. She looked like the moon itself given form. She stopped at the railing beside him, looking out over the sleeping city. "It's quiet," she said. "It's peace," Kael replied. "I haven't heard it in a long time. I don't know if I trust it." "Trust is a muscle," she said, turning to lean her back against the stone. "You have to exercise it or it atrophies. You trusted me today. That was a start." Kael turned to face her. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the harsh lines of stress that had defined him for so long. "I didn't just trust you," he admitted. "I followed you. You saved me, Seraphina. In every way a man can be saved." He reached out, taking her hand. He remembered the moon ceremony, the rejection, the way he had crushed her heart to save his own fear. "I made a mistake on this balcony," Kael said, his voice thick with regret. "I chose power because I thought it was the only shield I had. I thought love was a weakness." "And now?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Now I know that power without love is just a slow way to die," Kael said. He dropped to one knee. It was the second time that day he had knelt, but this time it wasn't an act of desperation. It was an act of devotion. "I, Kael Draven, Alpha of the Lowlands, reject the fear that has ruled me," he recited, rewriting the vows of his office. "I reject the crown as a symbol of dominance. I claim it only as a tool to serve." He looked up at her. The gold in his eyes melted into a warm human brown. "Seraphina," he whispered, "I offer you my life. I offer you my pack. I offer you my soul, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to his mate." He paused, his throat tight. "Choose me," he begged, echoing the words she had once wished to hear. "Please, choose me." Seraphina looked down at him. She didn't smile. This wasn't a moment for lightness. It was a covenant. "I chose you the moment I saw you," she said softly. "I chose you when you rejected me. I chose you in the Badlands. I chose you on the pyre." She reached down, cupping his face, and pulled him up. "Stand, Kael," she commanded gently. "I do not want a servant. I want a partner." He stood. They were eye to eye. Equal. "I choose you," she whispered against his lips. He kissed her. It wasn't the frantic, desperate kiss of the battlefield. It was slow. It was deep. It tasted of hope and winter berries. It sealed the cracks in his soul that Vane had exploited. Below them, the city lights flickered like fallen stars. The kingdom was scarred, yes. The road ahead would be difficult. But as Kael held her, feeling the steady rhythmic beat of her heart against his own, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would walk that road together, and for the first time in 10 years, the king was not afraid of the dark.